A black Navy SEAL stands accused of attacking a white police officer. No weapon, no video, just one man's claim in a system eager to presume guilt. When he stepped into that courtroom, he wasn't merely a defendant. He threatened their image, their comfort, their control. The judge wasted no time slapping on the cuffs right there before everyone without a word of inquiry or chance to explain. But he didn't flinch. He knew something they didn't, and soon their whole case would start to crumble. What kind of man can turn a courtroom set up to break him into one, forced to listen, like, comment, and subscribe to see how it all began? He didn't enter like someone defeated, nor like a triumphant hero. Clad in a simple gray suit and worn but polished shoes, his hands hung at his sides. No medals, no rank insignia, no legal entourage, just a black man walking into a sea of white faces who'd already written his story. He paused barely long enough to sense the cold expectation in the air. Sit down, stay silent, we've already decided who you are. At the bench, Judge Mills' silver-haired eyes, as icy as his demeanor, didn't even glance up. He simply noted something in his ledger, waiting for the room to settle, as though the verdict had been decided before the defendant arrived. On the prosecution side, Officer Reed sat confident and immaculately pressed in his uniform, smirking as though he'd already won. Not because of what happened, but because of who the man was. The charge was straightforward: assaulting an officer and obstructing a lawful detainment. No footage captured the incident. No visible injuries on Reed. No weapon on the SEAL. Just the unchallenged word of a white cop against a black man. As the defendant took his seat, the courtroom's tension only thickened. The bailiff's gaze was too sharp, the clerk's typing too deliberate, and a woman gripped her purse as if it might flee. His court-appointed lawyer, a young, nervous, recent grad, leaned close and whispered, "Stay calm. Don't speak unless spoken to." He gave no reply, fixing his eyes ahead with the same steely focus he'd used on missions, where every outcome was uncertain. Someone had to hold firm. Judge Mills cleared his throat. Court is now in session. We hear the state of Georgia versus Kellen A. Price on charges of assault and obstruction. He paused, finally looking up with no hint of curiosity, only the cold certainty of a man who thinks he already knows the truth. A decorated Navy SEAL, he noted almost offhand, one might expect better judgment from someone trained to protect, not attack. Reed rose to deliver his statement, measured, rehearsed. The defendant entered the precinct agitated and confrontational. When asked to remove his jacket, he refused. Upon approach, he raised his voice and shoved me. A few jurors nodded, not out of belief, but because it fit the story they wanted. Kellen simply shifted his gaze to the space between them and spoke evenly, "I never touched him." The courtroom fell silent, not because they were listening, but because they didn't want to hear it. Judge Mills leaned forward, elbows on the bench. "We will allow the evidence to speak." "Oh, Mr. Price." There was none. The body cam footage Reed cited was corrupted, the security feed mysteriously missing. Only their testimonies remained, and in this courtroom, testimony carried a shade. From the back, someone muttered, "That's the guy from the news, the SEAL." Another replied, "Doesn't matter. He got violent." The defense attorney raised a hand. "Your Honor, we request a continuance until the body cam footage can be retrieved." Judge Mills cut him off. "We will proceed. No hesitation, no consideration." The judge's authority was absolute, just as Kellen's record and sacrifice meant nothing here. Adjusting his glasses, Mills finally looked at Kellen, not like one man meeting another, but like a mechanic inspecting a broken part. "You may have worn a uniform," he said, "but in this courtroom, you're just another defendant." Kellen held his gaze unwavering. Then he spoke words that shifted the room's air. "Some men enter court already judged not by facts, but by skin." No one said it aloud, but every person felt it. The battlefield had simply moved. Officer Reed stood and delivered his account with cold precision. The defendant became aggressive when asked to remove his jacket. "I issued 3 verbal commands, all ignored. He squared up to me, unstable, threatening, and I feared for my safety." Heads nodded as if this tale were gospel. Not one juror asked what those commands were or why a decorated SEAL would suddenly snap in daylight with no weapon or motive. The young defense lawyer tried again. "Your Honor, without the footage, this risks a miscarriage of justice." Mills leaned back like a cat toying with a mouse. "This court does not wait on fairy tales. Officer Reed's testimony stands unless disproven." A faint rustle swept through the benches. the sound of minds made up before all the facts were heard. Kellen sat still, fingers stretching, knowing that in rooms like this, silence isn't consent, it's survival. His arms had begun to stiffen from the courtroom's cold tension. He looked forward not at the judge or the officer, but beyond them towards something they couldn't control. His lawyer whispered, "We'll try again later. Just stay calm." He offered a slight nod. A woman murmured, "Wasn't he in the military?" Her friend shrugged. "Doesn't mean he didn't do it. Combat changes people." One word cut deeper than any blade. Judge Mills tapped his pen. "Let the record show the defendant has no rebuttal to the officer's statement." Of course he didn't. There was nothing to counter when the trial was rigged from the start. Here he wasn't a SEAL or a veteran or a father. He was a symbol meant for dismantling, quietly, efficiently. Officer Reed rose again. "Your Honor, given the defendant's demeanor, I believe he may be emotionally unstable. For everyone's safety, I request he be restrained." Kellen hadn't moved an inch, but Reed painted him as a ticking bomb. Without even looking, Mills granted the request. The bailiff hesitated only momentarily before cuffing him. The click of steel sounded louder than any shout. From the back, a woman cried out, "This is wrong. Are you all going to pretend this is normal?" Her voice shook with outrage. Mills banged his gavel. "Order in the court." But the mood had shifted. Kellen glanced toward her and gave a small nod, acknowledging her courage. He faced the bench again and said calmly, "You're not restraining me, you're consoling your own fears." That line hung in the air. Even Reed blinked. Mills tightened his jaw, but said nothing. The woman was gently led away, yet her words lingered like smoke. The courtroom fell into a stunned hush. Seated again, handcuffed but unbowed, Kellen sat straight, eyes fixed ahead. He hadn't fidgeted, trembled, or raised his voice. His silence and composure unnerved them more than any outburst could. When his attorney finally spoke, it was obvious he had all the evidence he needed. Kellen had told his truth without uttering a word. His lawyer, once thin and timid, now cleared his throat and stood trying to appear confident. For the record, Mr. Kellen Price served 14 years in the U.S. Navy as part of SEAL Team 6. He led classified missions protecting our nation, earning decorations for valor, restraint, and feats most of us couldn't even imagine volunteering for. The judge barely glanced up, his pen making idle circles. "This is not a battlefield, counselor. It's a courtroom," he replied flatly, as if brushing away a speck of dust. A hush fell tense as cracking ice. Kellen said nothing at first, but his jaw clenched and the room grew colder. In the back, an older man's skin, worn like desert stone, removed his faded USS Carl Vinson cap and pressed it to his heart. Tears glistened in his eyes, speaking volumes. He remembered a forward base in Afghanistan where Kellen, one of only 3 Black SEALs, had saved a terrified private under fire. Back in court, Kellen sat motionless, embodying the burden of a man who bled for a country that now branded him a threat. Then a woman rose from the second bench, calm but resolute, and announced, "I'm Dr. Amina Walker. I have unseen evidence, deleted precinct footage recovered from an off-site backup, fully verified, and metadata intact." She placed a small drive on the prosecutor's table. Attorneys exchanged startled glances. Judge Mills's eyes narrowed. "And how exactly did you obtain this?" Dr. Walker explained that how she got the footage. Her ex-husband, Major Stephen Walker, had served alongside Officer Reed and noticed Reed's pattern of escalating encounters with Black men. After Stephen's fatal car crash, she inherited his digital archives and discovered the missing backup. Judge Mills folded his arms. "You expect me to admit this unvetted drive?" The prosecutor hesitated. Mills replied, "No certified chain of custody. This is hearsay." Kellen's lawyer stood at last. "Your Honor, under Federal Rule 902, digitally stored videos with verified metadata and intact timestamps are self-authenticating. The department failed to produce originals. This drive is our only source. Denying review denies material evidence." Mills blinked, then said, "Fine. Load it, but note how irregular this is." The monitor flickered to life. Grainy, silent footage showed Kellen seated calmly. Officer Reed entered, looming over him, jabbing, pacing, then slamming his palms against the wall, inches from Kellen's head. Gasps rose in the courtroom. Audio kick in. "You think that SEAL badge means anything here?" Reed sneered. Kellen replied evenly, "You don't own me here or out there, even in this uniform." Reed then shoved Kellen so hard his chair fell. Kellen hit the floor but did not resist. An older officer intervened, but Reed shrugged him off and hissed, "You may feel safe, but here you're just another threat we can put down." Judge Mills barked, "Turn it off!" His voice cracked. The lawyer whispered, and the video continued showing Reed leaving and Kellen calmly rising in his seat, staring into the camera. When it ended, the courtroom was silent, not in relief, but in stunned realization. Mills's gavel fell twice, but the impact had already been made. "It sounds like panic," Mills said, rising. "This court will now recess." Kellen finally met the judge's gaze. "You don't want the truth," he said quietly but sharply. "You want surrender, and I don't owe you that." No one cheered. The weight of what they'd seen spoke for itself. Mills called for a break, but the room held its breath. He sat rigid, gavel unused, clearly diminished. Kellen remained calm, hands folded, eyes steady. Then, almost against his will, he smiled a knowing curve, revealing he had already won before this began. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering. The lawyer nodded and organized a single sheet of paper. Suddenly, Mills stood, adjusting his robe as if reclaiming authority, yet no one watched him. In the back, a man in a gray suit rose and quietly left. Mills looked rattled, shuffling papers, dabbing his forehead. Kellen spoke again softly. "Even silence has weight. You only notice it when it shifts the room." A caucus seat adjusted. The courtroom felt unsteady, as if the system itself hesitated. After 15 minutes, Mills returned. The gray-suited seat at the back remained empty. Then a young naval officer entered, handed a sealed envelope marked urgent to Kellen's lawyer, and departed without ceremony. The lawyer, suddenly authoritative, announced, "Your Honor, we have received official communication from the Department of Defense." Judge Mills hesitated, then nodded for the officer to approach. The room watched as he slid open the envelope and read the pages, his face draining of its earlier arrogance. His hands shook as he lifted the phone dial and listened. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'm looking at it now." "Can you confirm?" The answer echoed through the courtroom. "He is active, protected, direct authorization." After 5 long seconds, the judge spoke with a hollow tone. "All charges against Mr. Kellen Price are dismissed effective immediately. This proceeding is concluded." The words hung in the air. No cheers, just stunned silence at being part of something far larger. Kellen didn't move. The judge wouldn't even meet his eyes. Mills straightened his robe and left, steps quick and retreating. No one stirred. Only Kellen's lawyer leaned in quietly, whispering something that drew a single nod. Then, without ceremony, Kellen stood and walked out, calm, unhurried, never looking back. His silent departure carried more weight than any speech could. Court officers glanced at one another uncertainly. The witnesses sat frozen, realizing that true power doesn't demand a room, it transforms it by standing firm. As Kellen reached the door, an elderly veteran in the front rose first, followed by another, then another, white and black, young and old, until the entire courtroom stood together in respectful acknowledgement. No applause, only recognition. In that moment, dignity had a name: Kellen Price. Everyone he passed now saw him as a man finally acknowledged. At the door, a 10-year-old boy whispered, "I want to be like him," and his father nodded without a word. The courtroom remained standing, no debate, no applause, because they all understood he entered. Judged by his skin, he left honored for his strength. Dignity doesn't shout, it simply rises. Kellen paused in the center and spoke softly. "I didn't come here for sympathy. I came because truth deserves its place." The judge opened his mouth but was met by a ripple of rising figures. First an older black veteran, then a middle-aged white woman, and soon row after row stood black. White, young, old, none sat again. Kellen turned to Mills. "You said this courtroom doesn't wait on fairy tales," he reminded him. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was a man trying to speak the truth before being cut off. Mills said nothing. Without another word, Kellen walked out, calm, unhurried, owning each step on the floor that once tried to break him. His quiet exit left no need for cheers. True justice doesn't demand noise. It commands respect. 6 months have passed since that silent courtroom witnessed the unbowed steps of a man who refused to be defined by injustice. Today, that same courtroom stands as a landmark of the quiet revolution that reshaped the city's conscience. He has stepped away from temporary legal work to embrace a new normal, one that looks very different now. On a recent Monday morning, he brought his 10-year-old son back to the courthouse, not as a defendant, but to dedicate the new Kellen Price Veterans Resource Center. Funded by community donations, the center offers counseling, job training, and free legal aid for fellow veterans honoring the legacy born from his trial. Local police policies have been overhauled, complaint procedures are transparent, body and security cameras cover every precinct, and all new officers undergo cultural awareness and human rights training. His name, once whispered as a symbol of threat, is now taught in training sessions as an example of resilience and justice. At home, his wife has become a partner in his outreach, co-authoring weekly newsletters that share other veterans' stories. The young public defender, who once trembled in court, has earned a scholarship and now carries forward a renewed faith in the law. One peaceful weekend evening, he sits on his porch watching the quiet street once marked by tension, now bathed in calm. This time, his silence is not fear, but confidence. 6 months on, we've learned that even the smallest voice can shake an entire system, and when truth is finally seen, justice follows. 1 year later, the city has transformed in ways no one imagined. The Veterans Resource Center, named in his honor, has expanded into 3 locations, each buzzing with job fairs, therapy groups, and legal clinics. His son now helps greet visitors proudly wearing a future SEAL cap. The police department's reform program, once met with skepticism, is now a model for neighboring jurisdictions. Body camera compliance sits at 99%, and civilian review boards are fully staffed. New recruits learn about dignity and accountability alongside tactics and procedure. His trial is studied alongside landmark cases and ethics courses. Kellen himself has become a sought-after speaker not as a former defendant, but as an advocate for justice. He travels to law schools and civic forums, sharing how one man's silence and unwavering composure ignited widespread change. Yet at home, he remains the same gentle father and husband, trading formal suits for jeans and sneakers, on weekends coaching his son's Little League team. In the state legislature, bills inspired by his case have turned into law. Clearer protocols for police stops, mandatory mental health support for officers, and permanent funding for veteran services. Newspapers feature follow-up stories under headlines like "From Courtroom to Catalyst" and "How One Trial Remade a City." On the anniversary of his trial, hundreds gather once more at the courthouse steps. The crowd is diverse: veterans, activists, students, families, each carrying signs that read simply, "Dignity still stands." Kellen steps forward, quietly lifts his gaze, and for a moment, the roar of applause is unnecessary. His story, now woven into the city's fabric, proves that when truth stands firm, justice endures long after the gavel falls. From this silent yet decisive journey, we learn that true power does not stem from loud proclamations or dramatic displays, but from the steadfast resolve to rise after being knocked down. The most important message is authority need not shout. It asserts itself through action. If you stood in the place of someone wronged, would you choose to protest loudly or remain calm and force the world to listen? You might share your own story, advocate for legal reforms, or simply inspire those around you by your unwavering strength. The larger question remains, will racism disappear by 2050? The answer depends on every small act today. If each individual chooses to speak up when witnessing injustice and support diversity rather than remain silent, then even though the road remains long, the goal of equality will no longer be a distant dream. By 2050, we could see a society where human rights are equally respected, where no one is judged by skin color or background, but that only happens if we dare to stand up again and change how the world perceives each other.